Welcome to Chapter 9. This chapter is on sexuality. So, in order to be truly self aware, we need to know our attitudes and beliefs on sex to figure out if our sexual behavior coincides with those attitudes and beliefs. But even though we're constantly bombarded with sexualized images in the media, sex is still a pretty difficult topic for people to talk about. They feel awkward, they feel uncomfortable, it feels taboo. But it is important to think about your sexuality and think about your beliefs and values in regards to your sexuality to have a real comprehensive understanding of yourself. So, sex can be a positive part of our life, both physically and mentally, and we'll talk about how that is in this chapter. Or it can be destructive and harmful if it's used as a way to control us, if it causes disconnection from others, or if it results in STIs or unplanned pregnancy. So the objectives of this chapter are to become aware of the sources of our sexual values and how we developed them, to appreciate the role of sexuality in intimate relationships, to become aware of the differences between sensuality and sexuality and learn how to enjoy both of those things, to become aware of the controversy over sexual addiction, and of course to understand the hazards of unprotected sex. So people of all ages can experience difficulty talking about sexual matters, so it's important that we learn how to talk openly about sexual issues. This discomfort starts in childhood with a lack of discussion on sexuality. When our parents just kind of tell us like that there's birds and there's bees, or they kind of shield us from sex when we're young. And so this can actually teach us that sex is something that's wrong to talk about or shameful to talk about. And the thing about not talking about sexual issues is that it contributes to the continuation of myths and misinformation regarding sexuality. So even in our sex-obsessed culture, we still are uncomfortable talking about sex with even our partners. Many people believe that when you're in love, sex will just take care of itself, but if left not discussed, couples often experience sexual problems. So studies show that talking about sex actually increases sexual satisfaction and overall satisfaction of the relationship. And one of the reasons why is because of mutual empathy. So mutual empathy is the awareness that each partner in a relationship cares for the other and knows that this care is reciprocated. And so mutual empathy is really the basis for effective sexual communication. Healthy sexuality involves positive emotions and some sort of relationship between partners. The more satisfied people are with their relationship, the more likely they are to talk openly about sex, which leads to better sex and ultimately a better relationship. So when we're talking about sex, we can refer to it as sexual self-disclosure, which is really revealing private sexual thoughts and feelings to another person, like our likes, our dislikes, our needs, our desires, our fears, our concerns, any STIs we've had, past experience, sexual values and morals, and then conditions of sex, what we're comfortable with and not comfortable with. But there's lots of reasons people don't engage in sexual self-disclosure. The first one is lack of information. Some people just don't know how to talk about sex because they don't know anything about sex. And the second reason people don't talk about sex is because of embarrassment. For some people, the uncomfortability with sex will cause them to break up rather than talk about the issues they're having. The third reason people don't talk about sex is insecurity about using the right words. Scientific words might be too stuffy for some people, and street jargon might be too offensive. And then sexual taboos. Some people grow up in a culture or family that never talk about sex, and that sexual repression just always stays with them. They never learn that it's okay to talk about. The next reason people don't engage in sexual self-disclosure is fear of judgment. They fear their partner might be disgusted with what they say, or shocked, or offended, or hurt. And then finally, the reason people don't talk about sex is fear of rejection. It's possible, but couples who can't talk about sex usually end poorly anyways. So college-level sex education courses help break down the communication barriers by demystifying sexual health and practices. So that's kind of what we're doing here with this chapter. However, since the classes are usually held in large academic settings, people often don't feel comfortable asking questions about sex. So, what's nice about this format is that we can talk about sex online, so we have kind of that anonymity and privacy. However, some colleges, for example Harvard, have what's called Sex Week, and this is a event that's led by the students, and it's intended to provide a safe space to talk about things like casual sex, religion, different types of sexual fetishes like bondage, without any type of judgment. However, when Harvard did their Sex Week, they received a lot of criticism and backlash from outside sources, but there's also a lot of people that felt it was a very positive experience. So, in terms of the cyber cultural perspective, the internet has expanded the avenues to explore and express our sexuality. One thing that is popular is cyber pornography, and this is sexually explicit materials that are accessible online through the internet. There are 12.6 million pornography sites worldwide, 420 million porn pages worldwide. And in terms of daily porn search requests, there are 68 million searches worldwide per day. The number one most viewed type of pornography is big, beautiful women porn, often referred to as BBW porn. And in the United States, pornography produces a revenue of $13.3 billion. The area of the United States that consumes the most porn is what's often referred to as the Bible Belt, the southern states. So psychologists are now talking about the relationship between the sexually explicit material on the internet and the access to sexual forums and discussing sex, meeting partners for sex, all of these different ways in which sex is more accessible because of the internet. And so there's some terms that they've come up with. The first of which is alter sexuality, and this is defined as an increased fluidity of sexual experience. And so alter sexuality is really arguing that sexual behavior online demonstrates that people's sexuality cannot easily be labeled and changes with each sexual experience. For example, cybersex allows people to talk about sexual fantasies or use language that they might not use in real life with their partner or their wife or their husband. And then there's what's called wiki sexuality, and wiki sexuality are sexual experiences that are not possible in real life. So it's kind of an add-on to the idea of alter sexuality. It's an expanded idea. And with wiki sexuality, people can experiment with different sexual acts, behaviors, and lifestyles than in their real life. So maybe wiki sexuality might be a person who, like a CEO of a company who likes to engage in dominatrix but would never tell his significant other that out of embarrassment. But through the internet, he can meet with dominatrix or video chat with them or chat online or watch videos of dominatrix. So those are some of the different ways that the cyber world is influencing sexuality. So the messages that people receive about appropriate expressions of sexuality is very much culture specific. And so one's sexual personality, whether they're very open or sometimes referred to as sex positive or sex negative, depends on a lot of different factors like culture, religion, morals, family background, sex orientation, sex attitude, sex behavior, preferences, experiences, sexual expectations, like how you expect males to perform during sex and females, and then a person's comfort level with sexuality. So studies show that students who take sex ed classes are generally more empathetic and have an increased comfort level with different types of sexuality. So the LGBTQ community, people that are into different sexual lifestyles like bondage or dominatrix, for example. And so when you think about your own ideas about sexuality, it's important that you ask yourself, where did you get these ideas from? These values, these beliefs, these attitudes. And most of us get them from a combination of places, from our friends, from our peers, from TV, from our parents, from what we learn in school, from what we learn in church. So most of our sources, though, are not very scientific, and generally research finds that a lot of us get very incorrect information. And this can cause unrealistic expectations and conclusions. So, our early sexual experiences are also a poor teacher. When we're first starting out having sex, it can be unpleasant, it can be painful, it could be awkward, or it could be scary. So, some of the other options for educating people about sex are sex education at school or abstinence only education. And so, there's a controversy about which is a more effective and more appropriate form of education. So, studies found that people who take sex education make better, more informed, and more thoughtful choices about sex. For example, they have a lower tolerance for rape and rape myths. High school seniors have fewer high risk sex behaviors, and college freshmen use more contraception. But some schools don't offer sex education classes. They offer what are sometimes referred to as abstinence only education classes. So, sexual abstinence is refraining from sexual intercourse until entering a committed, long term monogamous relationship. And abstinence is defined as refraining from intercourse and often also refraining from other forms of sexual contact. So, abstinence only education is the decision to avoid teaching adolescent students about sexual activity, STIs, contraception, etc., based on the theory that such education is unnecessary if students are taught to just simply abstain from sexual behavior. Just don't do it. But studies show this does not decrease teen sex activity, STIs, unwanted pregnancy, and in fact, in some schools that were practicing abstinence-only education, these things increased. So, defining sexual abstinence, as we've done, can be a little bit difficult because sexual abstinence can mean different things to different people, different cultures, and different religious groups. To some people, sexual abstinence means absolutely no sexual contact, and to other people, it just means no intercourse. So it's difficult to define. But ultimately, you need to develop your own sexual values and make sure that your sexual behaviors are coinciding with those sexual values. Sexually responsible decisions involve considering the possible consequences of your sexual behavior, how it's going to make you feel, how it's going to make the other person feel, how any potential health consequences that could come from it if you have unprotected sex. And then it's important to learn to establish sexual boundaries because if you don't, then it's very difficult to be true to your own values. So, know what you're comfortable with and what you're not comfortable with, and make sure that you then kind of adhere to those boundaries that you set for yourself. Okay, let's watch a video on abstinence education.
America's favorite abstinence preacher, Bristol Palin, is accidentally pregnant for a second time. And that's pretty much abstinence-only education in a nutshell. Oh, hi everyone! Welcome back to season 3 of Braless. I missed y'all so much. I hope you're having a great summer. I thought we'd kick things off with a topic that's near and dear to my heart: sex. I'm a simple lady, okay? For those of you not in the know, there's a robust army of forces in America that are working hard to promote biased information about sexuality and unplanned pregnancy. This army is assembled of politicians and legislators, teachers and doctors, religious leaders, celebrities, and a wide network of foundations and nonprofits. One of these forces is the Candies Foundation. Candies, it just sounds so sweet, right? But it's not. They've produced a slew of condescending ads that say things like, "You think being in school sucks? A baby sucks a whole lot more." And "you were supposed to be changing the world, not changing diapers." They may as well say, "Hey, teens of America, just keep your legs closed, you dumb sluts." Candies frames having a baby out of wedlock as the ultimate failure. A failure which falls squarely on the girls' and rarely the boys' shoulders. They direct a ragey, shamey storm toward teen parents and claim that they'll never succeed. These are stigmas that create more barriers for real-life teen parents every day. Sadly, the foundation has multiple megastar headliners, including Carly Rae Jepsen, Fergie, and Hilary Duff. Not gonna lie, that one hit me in the Lizzie McGuire feels. The Candice Foundation also hired abstinence speaker Bristol Palin, Sarah Palin's daughter, to tell students not to have sex because it will ruin their lives. She speaks all over the country about the importance of not having sex and makes a ton of cash doing it. Of course, the fact that Bristol is pregnant again is a massive facepalm of hypocrisy, but it also stands as yet another testament to how well abstinence-only programs really work. And they don't. It nearly always fails people who need it the most, including Bristol herself. So what the heck, America? We need to face the truth here. There have been basically a quadrillion studies now, all concluding that telling teens not to have sex doesn't work. It doesn't stop the sexy times, it doesn't prevent disease and infection, it doesn't prevent unplanned pregnancy. In fact, it's the very opposite of abstinence-only education that garners these results. Comprehensive sex ed increases the age that teens first have sex, it helps prevent disease, sexual assault, and unplanned pregnancy. Access to birth control also plays a vital role here. Colorado made national headlines this week because they've managed to cut unplanned teen pregnancy by 40% in 4 years. Their abortion rate also fell by 42%. What is this wizardry and how did they do it? Well, it's actually pretty simple. They offered free long-acting birth control like the IUD and the implant to teenagers and poor women who wanted them. If Bristol and the Candice Foundation want to end unplanned pregnancy, why are they all about this ish? And that's where it gets real, y'all. Abstinence-only education isn't really about prevention or education. It's definitely not a health campaign. It's an anti-sex campaign, masquerading as a health campaign, which undermines public health. Since the 80s, every political move made by the abstinence-only movement is premised on the idea that sexuality is bad, harmful, and in need of repressing. Abstinence-only proponents do their best to limit access to much-needed information about sexuality and resources for sexual health, information that literally saves lives. They often aggressively target young women and LGBT youth, telling them that their sexuality is wrong, sinful, and shameful. Worst of all, the abstinence-only army is really powerful, and they have a lot of people in high places. Just a couple months ago, Congress allocated $25 million more in funding to fear-based abstinence-only programs. Because, you know, facts, education, I mean, who really needs them? So I want to know, did you guys have abstinence-only sex ed, or are you in one of the lucky 13 states with actual sex ed? I'd love to read your stories down below, and I will be back next Friday with more Braless.
Okay, so for lecture activity 1, I want you to tell me if you think that it is appropriate for sex education to be taught in schools, and if so, what age do you think that, or what grade do you think kids should be being taught sexual education classes? If you don't think that sexual education should be taught in the school, how do you think that people should get educated on sex? Do you think it should happen in the home, or not at all, or by having a kid go talk to a doctor? So tell me your ideas on that in 3 to 4 sentences for lecture activity 1. So a lot of people harbor shame and embarrassment and guilt related to sex. So common causes of sex-related guilt are extramarital affairs, sexual promiscuity, hooking up, which we'll talk about later, which is basically casual sex, certain sexual behaviors, same-sex behaviors, and masturbation. So attitudes about masturbation have actually changed rapidly over the years. In 1904, Dr. William Walling wrote a book titled Sexuality, and in the book, he said that masturbation would lead to sickness, physically wasting away, and even death. And in the 1800s, common beliefs about masturbation included that it would give you hairy palms, genital cancer, blindness, insanity, sterility, impotence, asthma, a change to penis size, loss of sexual enjoyment, and potentially instant death. But in 1972, the American Medical Association declared masturbation a normal sexual behavior. And most people do feel like it is a normal thing to do and a healthy thing to do, but simultaneously report feeling guilty about it. So whenever we research sexuality, it's difficult to get precise statistics on people's opinions towards it because People tend to have a really difficult time talking about sex, so we never know the accuracy. But the range of people that report feeling guilty for masturbation is between 14 and 47% of people. So, masturbation is defined as self stimulation of one's genitals for sexual pleasure. Masturbation allows individuals to become more aware of their own bodily sensations. It also helps partners explain what feels best to them. It can serve as a sexual release while couples are working on their issues. It helps people work on their own sexual difficulties alone so they don't have the pressure of being with a partner. And then there's a lot of common misconceptions about masturbation and intimate relationships. For example, one misconception, so this is not true, is that masturbation is a substitute for sex. Masturbation is a sign that the person is sexually unsatisfied with their partner. People masturbate only when they don't have a partner, and people who masturbate are sexually deprived. So these things are in fact myths, but what's true about masturbation is that it's usually a part of a healthy sexual life, regardless of relationship status. So research shows people who masturbate continue to masturbate once they're in a relationship. And people that have frequent sex actually tend to masturbate more than people who don't have frequent sex. People who masturbate tend to be more physically and emotionally satisfied with their sex life. So there are a lot of positive emotional, psychological, physical outcomes of masturbation. However, psychologists and physicians agree that if you don't masturbate, that's also perfectly normal and perfectly okay. Okay, so now we're going to delineate between sensuality and sexuality and discuss different techniques to enjoy both. So, sensuality is defined as enjoying all of one's senses, and it doesn't have to include sexual activity at all. In our culture, sex is considered intercourse and it is results oriented, meaning that the goal is orgasm. So, orgasm is a series of muscular contractions of the pelvic muscles that occur at the peak of sexual arousal. Um, However, there are different things that prevent people from having orgasm, like performance status and expectations getting in the way. And even sexual arousal is affected by numerous factors. And so, also, the potential for someone to have an orgasm is affected by numerous factors. So, most sex problems actually happen at the point of intercourse. So, sex problems being things like erectile difficulties, lack of arousal, lack of orgasm, rapid ejaculation, painful sex. And so, sexual dysfunctions are defined as impairments in sexual functioning that cause distress. Erectile dysfunction is a commonly known type of sexual dysfunction, and it's a consistent inability to achieve and maintain a erection required for adequate sexual relations. It's sometimes referred to as impotence. And it is caused by fatigue, stress, performance anxiety, lack of intimacy, and or medical issues. So, psychologists argue that maybe we should focus more on sensuality rather than focusing on intercourse and focusing on having an orgasm, because research shows that these focuses tend to actually correlate highly with these sexual dysfunctions and these sexual arousal problems. So, one of the ways to focus more on sensuality is with erotic touch. So, erotic touch is intimate or sexual touching between partners, usually with the hands, for the purpose of sexual arousal and sharing sensual pleasure. So, erotic touch includes things like kissing, sensual massage, and even genital touching. It's often considered foreplay and it's used prior to intercourse. We know in psychology that touch, even non sexual touch, is necessary to humans. In fact, there was a study that was done years ago where babies were put in orphanages, and a third of the babies that were not touched actually ended up dying. And there's lots of other studies that show that that touch is a very important part of our existence. So, touch that doesn't lead to sex is equally as important in intimate relationships. In fact, when touch only occurs with the goal of sex, then that touch becomes less pleasurable. So, whole body sensuality and touch leads to more rewarding sex than just genital touching and just sexual intercourse itself. So again, the idea is maybe if we focus more on sensuality, we'll have better sex lives and less sexual dysfunction. So some tips on how to touch your partner: touch them how they want to be touched. Pay attention to their facial expressions, body language, their breathing, if they're moaning. Ask them what's the best way to find out how they want to be touched. And frustration can occur when touching our partner how we want to be touched is what we're doing, and they aren't doing it because they're trying to show us how they want to be touched. So if we're both just showing each other how we want to be touched, then no one's being touched the way they want. So it's important to talk about those things. And be sure to use positive reinforcement. If they touch you how you like, tell them in the moment that feels good. Don't put them down or embarrass them in the moment. Instead, wait until like a non-sexual time and then tell them in a positive way what you like. And then if you need to slip in some things you don't like, that's okay, but just sugarcoat it. Don't just say, I don't like how you touched me. Masters and Johnson are sex researchers that suggest taking your partner's hand and showing them exactly how you like to be touched. So sexuality can bring us pleasure, and it is also a healthy dimension of our lives. In fact, research found that men who had 2 or less orgasms a week are twice as likely to die from any cause at all than men who orgasm at least 2 times per week. So sexual health correlates so much with our general health that sexual health can be considered an efficient mark of our general health. High ejaculation frequency might be associated with a lower risk of total and organ-confined prostate cancer. And women's health tends to be positively influenced by endocrine events and physical and emotional reactions associated with sexual activity. For example, oxytocin gets released when women have sex. This is the bonding chemical, and it may actually lower depression. So other health benefits of sex include improved immunity, better heart health, lower blood pressure. It's a form of exercise, so it burns calories. Pain relief. It may help reduce prostate cancer, as we mentioned. Improve sleep, boost libido. So the idea being that the more sex you have, the more sex you desire. It improves bladder control, and then, like we mentioned, it increases oxytocin and other lymphatic connections. Okay, so let's watch a video on health benefits of sex.
There, that's real balance and poise.
So people generally value love and affection in sexual relationships. However, there are people that have satisfying sex without love. But research shows that most people do want to be loved and love in return. Of course, there are gender differences on views of sex and love. But most people value love and affection in sexual relationships. So, intimacy is defined as a close emotional relationship characterized by a deep level of caring for another person, which is really a basic component of all loving relationships. We've all experienced what's often referred to as the TMI phenomenon, but in relationships, communication about sex leads to longer lasting relationships. So, opening up is necessary to intimacy, and in fact, some researchers consider it the most important factor in relationships. Self disclosure in relationships usually does increase over time. And so there are three main reasons that self disclosure increases intimacy. The first reason is we tend to like people that reveal personal information to us. It helps us to feel more connected to them, and we can usually relate to things they're saying so we don't feel so alone. Um, the second reason that self disclosure increases intimacy is that we are more likely to disclose personal information to someone that we are romantically attracted to. And then disclosing information makes us feel more attracted to someone. So the more vulnerable and open we are, the more connected we feel to that person, and then that increases attraction. So love is a big part of sexuality for a lot of people. Research shows that the most physically and emotionally satisfying sex occurs in committed long-term relationships. In fact, 65% of people report that they would not have sex with someone unless they loved them. And we know that people in committed relationships engage in a wider variety of sexual activities. So the more comfortable with people or the more comfortable with your partner that you are, the more likely you are to try out different sexual experiences. So conversely, there are some people who just want their sexual needs met, or sometimes people just want their sexual needs met without the love and emotional intimacy that we were just talking about. So this can be referred to as a hookup, when two people have sexual intercourse in a casual way without making clear any mutual or individual desire for a relationship. And hooking up is most prevalent among American college students, but occurs among younger adolescents and non-college adults as well. So there's something called the hookup culture, which is sexually intimate behavior between two people without an emotional commitment. And it's said by some that nowadays there are more people hooking up than ever before. So people have always had sex without emotion, but now it seems to be like more widely accepted. In fact, there's apps that people can use to find a person to have casual sex with, like Tinder or Grindr. And these things may have contributed to the shift in attitudes, but the shift could also be due to people living with their parents and getting married later than ever before. People state that they can't find a job that can support them living on their own, so they're not going to get in a relationship with someone else and then bring them back to their parents' house. And they believe they shouldn't have a committed relationship until they are more independent financially and physically. So other factors that may have made casual sex more acceptable are the accessibility of porn, like we talked about earlier, and the sexual revolution in the 60s and 70s. The sexual revolution really changed the way people in America looked at and thought about sex. There's another phenomenon called friends with benefits, which are friendships with another person whose primary function is to be a sexual partner when both people are mutually available and quote unquote in the mood, without the promise or the desire for a long-term romantic relationship. So the difference between friends with benefits and hookups is that hookups are usually like a one-time thing, and friends with benefits are usually a longer-term casual sex relationship. So some people state that the pros of casual sex are sex without the expectation of monogamy, a chance to sleep with a higher number of people, and that it doesn't distract from one's focus, like their schoolwork or athletics or their social life. And other people state that the cons are that there's a strong potential to become emotionally attached and hurt if the emotional attachment is not reciprocated. And then the lack of intimacy becoming normalized can be a con. And of course, there's the risk of STIs and or unplanned pregnancy if the people aren't having safe sex. So let's watch a video now on hookup culture.
The Science of Us presents The Kids Are All Right. These days, you hear a lot about how promiscuous young people are. In recent years, there have been tons of articles and blog posts about how dating apps and liberal attitudes are creating an emotionally destructive quote-unquote hookup culture. But don't lock your kids up yet. Science tells another story. It's true that the American dating landscape has changed in the past few decades. The median age at which people get married for the first time has crept steadily upward. In 1980, it was 22 for women and 24 for men, and today it's 27 and 29. As a result, the average lifetime number of sexual partners has grown as well. And of course, smartphones and the internet have made it easier to find people who are single and looking to mingle. But to get a sense of what modern romance is really like, take a look at the General Social Survey, a survey of Americans' attitudes that's been conducted since 1972, and which includes items on sexual experiences. Several researchers have used the GSS to test the theory that casual, non-monogamous sex is running rampant, and they've found no evidence to suggest that that theory holds up. In fact, at least one study suggested that people born in the 70s and 80s are actually less promiscuous than previous generations. So if kids these days aren't actually hookup crazed, why does it feel that way? Here are 3 factors. One is a cognitive bias called rosy retrospection. We have inaccurately positive views of the past, so we forget that panic about young people and sex is actually nothing new. Another factor is young people deceiving themselves. Research shows that college students consistently overestimate the amount of sex their peers are having. They inaccurately think they are the only ones not having lots of wild times, and that fuels the illusion of a sexual free-for-all. And perhaps most importantly, journalists and audiences tend to focus on outlier cases. You know, individuals who are very promiscuous. These people might be fun to write about, but they don't give us an accurate view of the broader landscape. So, it's obviously true that sexual and relationship norms change over time, and dating apps have certainly made it easier to find people. But a whole new hookup culture that's unique to today's teens and 20-somethings? There's just no evidence to support that.
Alright, for lecture activity 2, I would like you to tell me if you think the hookup culture is a real thing. Do you think that casual sex is something that is occurring more now than ever before? And if yes, tell me why. If no, tell me why not. So give me 2 to 3 sentences on hookup culture and casual sex, and if you think it's more prevalent, why or why not. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about pornography. So the main reason for pornography is to sexually arouse people. The type of sexually explicit material that turns a person on really depends on that person. Research shows that even when people are offended by sexually explicit material, some sexual arousal may actually occur. And this is because sexual physiological responding is reflexive and not necessarily under our conscious control. So just because something arouses you does not always mean you like it, that you want to view it again, or that you want to imitate it. People are generally more aroused by material they find personally or morally acceptable. And studies show that religious and politically conservative people experience more guilt and react more negatively to explicit material in general. Studies show that men with low IQ are antisocial and have aggressive tendencies, tend to prefer more violent porn. And studies have found that material that degrades women, generally men rate it more arousing and found it less degrading than the women viewers did. However, as degrading behaviors increased, both men and women found it less and less arousing. In another study, this other study found that women prefer porn made by women and porn for women or couples over porn made by or for men. And men rated all of the porn more favorably than women did. In another study, college males and females were shown both romantic and non romantic porn, and both genders actually reported higher arousal for the romantic porn. So, many people believe that pornography leads to the discrimination and victimization of women. Um, Conversely, there are many men who watch porn but do not victimize women. So, studies have been really inconclusive on this and contradictory. However, most themes in pornography do objectify, dehumanize, or are violent towards women. There hasn't been any scientific evidence that viewing porn leads to violence or rape or sexual assault of women. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. It just means that it's hard to study. So, to kind of exemplify this, there's been 4 states that have lifted their bans on pornography, and it had absolutely no effect on the amount of sex crimes. Another concern focusing on pornography is whether or not pornography can become addictive. So let's watch now a video on the science of pornography addiction.
Sexual tastes vary from person to person, but with the current pornography epidemic, as some call it, one has to wonder how exactly this may affect our desires and perception of sexuality. Moreover, how does it affect our sex lives? Pornography constitutes about 25% of all search engine requests and is the 4th most common reason people give for going on the internet. And while it may seem to simply facilitate an instinctual sexual response linked to millions of years of evolution, the truth is, pornography has dynamically changed over time, ultimately molding our tastes and desires. The not-so-shocking truth is that pornography has profound consequences for the brain and acts in many ways like a drug. With prolonged exposure, your tolerance is increased, and many often find themselves addicted. Though it's not a physical substance, it leads to the same general loss of control, the compulsiveness to seek out the activity despite negative consequences, and withdrawal when it goes away, much like that of gambling or running, for example. The issue is that continued exposure can cause long-term or even lifelong neuroplastic change in the brain. Dopamine is released as a reward whenever we accomplish something, whether it be eating to sustain life or sexual activity to produce future life. And this dopamine consolidates neural connections in order to drive us to perform the same activity in the future. In other words, it alters and forms the brain cells to motivate certain actions. It rewires your brain. The National Institutes of Health measure drug addictiveness by testing rats. The rat is trained to press a button in order to get a drug, and the harder it works indicates how addictive the substance is. It turns out that the more addictive a drug is, the more dopamine we see released. And while there is, unfortunately, no rat porn that we can give to them, we do know that dopamine is also released during sexual excitement, which pornography plays right into. The more time you spend doing it, the more dopamine gets released, which reinforces the behavior and makes you not only desire it in the future, but require it. And as you begin to imagine these images away from the computer or while having sex, they become reinforced. Furthermore, each orgasm releases even more dopamine, which consolidates the connections made during the session. It's a feedback loop that becomes harder to escape. And just like a drug, your tolerance for visual stimulation has now compounded, making it more difficult to be turned on by reality. Pornography addiction can often lead to finding your mate less attractive. The good news is, it doesn't have to be permanent. Usually when people understand the mechanism and realize it's affecting their relationships, they can stop. The brain is often described as a use it or lose it system because the neural connections you stimulate grow stronger and desire to be activated, while the ones you ignore become weakened. Much like your muscles, which, if sitting still all day, itch for activity, but after prolonged non-use, they become complacent. Luckily, because of this use it or lose it brain, the same neuroplastic system that proliferates these habits can also be used to acquire healthier ones. Got a burning question you want answered? Ask it in the comments or on Facebook and Twitter, and subscribe for more weekly science videos.
Okay, so there is a bit of a controversy over whether or not sexual addiction is an actual disorder. Some people report having sexual urges and obsessions that may be linked to the overuse of sex-related websites and apps. And this can be a source of disruption to their normal functioning, like their ability to go to work or get a good night's sleep. It can be a disruption to their relationships. It can also lead to sexual dysfunction and pain to people close to them. So there's also a controversy over whether the terms sexual addiction and compulsive sexual behavior are even appropriate. Some people say that it should correctly be called hypersexual disorder if it's going to be classified as a disorder at all. So hypersexual disorder, if that's how we want to term it, is usually defined as a sexual compulsivity and obsessive preoccupation with and compulsive need for sexual activity. So it's not a paraphilia, but it's a compulsion. And this is because their behaviors are not usually considered to be abnormal or strange. They just kind of can't consume enough sexual media or have enough sexual activity. So, people with hypersexual disorder or sex addiction spend an excessive amount of time thinking about and planning sexual behaviors. Their urges occur in response to anxiety, depression, or stress, and the disorder can lead to paraphilias, which is abnormal sex behavior, or extramarital affairs, rapes, and sexual harassment. So there are many 12-step peer-led groups that have been formed to deal with sex as an addiction. And these programs mirror the structure of Alcoholics Anonymous. So there are groups like Sexaholics Anonymous, Sex Addicts Anonymous, and many more. So research shows that the more one watches internet porn, the stronger the sexual urges usually become. And so indicators of a sex addiction include unexplained absences, excessive computer use, social and emotional withdrawal, evidence of hiding, lying, and secretive behavior, increased concerns about their sexual performance, and then decreased affection, intimacy, and non-sexual touching. Okay, so let's watch a video now on sex addiction.
The sex addiction debate rages on, and that's not the only thing that's raging on. You feel me? No, you don't. Hi folks, Lacey Green here, and you're watching D News. At the very beginning of D News, back when we were just a fetus, I did a video on sex addiction and whether or not it's a real disorder. If you remember those days, you get a gold star. Now, I'll let you watch that video if you're interested, but today I'm talking about a new study, one of the first of its kind, that shifts that debate. It's always a new study up in here, isn't it? The sex addiction study was published in the journal Socioaffective Neuroscience and Psychology, and it looked at 52 men and women who have trouble controlling their porn usage. The researchers hooked them up to an EEG and monitored the neurons firing in their brain while they viewed various images. The images were divvied up into a few categories. There were pleasant sexual, pleasant non-sexual, neutral, and unpleasant images. This study closely replicates how drug addiction has been researched around the world. People addicted to alcohol, cocaine, heroin, that kind of thing. In an addict, their brain gets all weird and nutty when they're shown visual stimuli of their addiction, so that's what the researchers expected to see if the sexy pics were to trigger addictive impulses. But that's not what they saw. The EEG graphs came in, and there was nothing particular or special about the brain's response to the images. The neural activity didn't look like what you expect to see of someone who's an addict. It was no different than someone who has a high libido. So that's an interesting thingy. Does this mean that sex addiction has been debunked for good and we can wave it bye-bye? Not quite. The study will need to be repeated and other research teams will need to get the same results independently before that's on the table. But this is a significant step. The researchers say these results alter our understanding of what we're calling sex addiction, possibly reframing it as an unusually high libido, which is an important difference. If it's a psychological addiction, that changes the way that we see normal sexuality. It changes treatment options and how it's classified in the DSM. And FYI, the new DSM refrained from a yay or nay on sex addiction as a disorder because they say it needs more research. What's surprising to me is that in all this hubbub about sex addiction for the past 25 years, nobody thought, hey guys, maybe we should actually try to study this. Science people, It helps you learn a thing. If this is all very confusing for you and you're like, Lacey, I have no idea what's going on. Where am I? What's sex addiction? Just watch my other video. It's all gonna be okay. Thanks for watching D News, guys. We'll be back soon because we update twice a day. I'll see you then.
Okay, so let's talk about the hazards of unprotected sex, which include HIV and AIDS, other STIs. We used to call them STDs, sexually transmitted diseases, but now they're more appropriately called sexually transmitted infections, or STIs. And then another hazard of unprotected sex that we're going to talk about are unplanned pregnancies. So let's start with HIV and AIDS. HIV stands for human immunodeficiency virus, and this is the virus that causes AIDS. And AIDS is a gradual failure of the immune system, which leads to serious opportunistic infections, which in turn can lead to death. So what opportunistic infections means is that there are certain infections, like pneumonia, for example, that prey on a weak immune system. So the virus is transmitted through sexual contact or contaminated needles or blood transfusions. And the AIDS virus attacks the body's immune system, which is its natural defense against disease. And so it may be anywhere from 6 months to several years before an infected person notices the initial mild symptoms. Or those initial mild symptoms can appear within a few days and then kind of resolve themselves in a week. So it's important to get tested because you don't always notice anything for anywhere up to 6 months before you would notice any of the symptoms. And so some of the symptoms include fever, rash, weight loss, severe tiredness, swollen glands, diarrhea. All these symptoms tend to last a long time and gradually get worse. Because the immune system does not work well, people can get severe pneumonias or unusual cancers, especially in the skin. And then there are other sexually transmitted infections, genital herpes, HPV, chlamydia, gonorrhea, syphilis. And some STIs can be transmitted without genital-to-genital contact. For example, herpes can be transmitted from oral sex. If treated quickly, most STIs usually don't negatively impact a person's life. Most of them are curable. And not all STIs have symptoms, or the symptoms can take a really long time to show. So it's good to get tested regularly. If not treated, STIs can lead to organ failure, infertility, and in some cases even death. And then in terms of unplanned pregnancies, for unmarried women ages 20 to 29, 70% of all their pregnancies are unplanned. But there's lots of options for birth control that women can talk to their gynecologist or primary care physician about. And then, of course, there's options for men for birth control as well, condoms being the most popular. But for women, there's pills, there's shots, there's intrauterine devices, there's Plan B. So it's important to stay safe. And research shows that more college students are having protected sex than ever before, and a lot of that is attributed to sex education. So let's watch a video now on HIV and AIDS, and then that's going to be followed by a video on the other STIs.
HIV/AIDS has taken the lives of over 39 million people worldwide, despite our efforts to prevent, treat, and better understand it. But with 35 million people currently infected, what exactly is it, and are we close to a cure? To contract HIV, the virus must enter the bloodstream, and it's often transmitted from infected bodily fluids like blood, semen, vaginal fluids, or breast milk. Once inside the bloodstream, HIV targets a variety of cells, but most specifically the T helper cells, which are a type of white blood cell that play an essential role in our immune system and fighting infections. The outer envelope of HIV is covered in glycoproteins which mutate frequently, ultimately tricking the T cell receptors to not recognize the virus. Once attached to specific proteins on the T cell, it begins to fuse the membranes together and eventually enters the cell, where it releases 2 viral RNA strands and 3 essential replication enzymes. Because HIV is a retrovirus, the RNA is transcribed into DNA, represented here by a zipper of 2 RNA strands transcribing into DNA. This DNA is then integrated into the host cell's genome. This makes the T cells treat the viral genes like their own, which causes them to make more copies of the virus. These then leave the host cell and mature, ultimately seeking more T cells. The virus is particularly difficult to treat because its mutation rate is so high. Overall, the replication process creates more than 10 billion new virions each day. During these initial stages of replication, called the latency period, a person may not show any major symptoms for up to 8 years. If not treated, the HIV eventually kills off the specific T cells it infects. When these T cells fall below 200 cells per cubic millimeter of blood, it becomes acquired immune deficiency syndrome, or AIDS. After progressing this far, the immune system becomes suppressed and is much more susceptible to cancers and opportunistic infections such as pneumonia. A person doesn't die from AIDS, they actually die from an illness that the body could not fend off. Nowadays, there is medicine that helps fight these opportunistic infections, like Daraprim, which was recently in the news when Martin Shkreli of Turing Pharmaceutical decided to raise the price from $13.50 to $750 per pill. There are also antiretroviral drugs that slow the virus down by blocking certain enzymes which are required for the virus to multiply. Similarly, those without HIV but at high risk of contracting the virus may take pre-exposure prophylaxis, or PrEP. This works similar to antiretroviral drugs by blocking the enzyme reverse transcriptase. Thankfully, there is hope for a cure. A small population of people are immune to the HIV virus because of a mutation linked to the T cells. In one case, an HIV-positive subject received a bone marrow transplant, meaning they were given new stem cells that generate different T cells, and within 20 months, there was no evidence of the virus in their bloodstream. Though this is very individualized medicine, it certainly opens up the possibilities of generating HIV-resistant cells. Combine this with other therapies and preventative measures like condoms, clean needle programs, and safe blood transfusions, and HIV/AIDS may one day be a thing of the past. Your sharing of this video is much appreciated in the effort to help spread knowledge and awareness. And a special thanks to Audible for supporting this episode to give you a free 30-day trial at audible.com/ASAP. This week, we wanted to recommend the book Redefining Reality, which explores what is real and what is illusory from both a scientific and philosophical perspective through a series of really awesome lectures. You can get a free 30-day trial at audible.com/ASAP and choose from a massive selection. We love them as they're great when you're on the go. And subscribe for more weekly science videos.
Faster than a sloth-eating breakfast, more accurate than a blindfolded archer, smarter, safer, healthier in 99 seconds or less. This is Quick Zips, the late night edition. Sexuality education, fast.
I'm Galena Mines, and welcome to our show. Viewers asked us to answer the question, what is an STI? Well, an STI is a sexually transmitted infection. Some people call them sexually transmitted diseases, or STDs, but doctors prefer the word infection because a person may be infected and may potentially infect others without showing signs of disease. So, we'll go with STI and occasionally toss in STD to keep you on your toes. STIs go by a lot of names and it can be confusing. HIV is an STI. So are herpes, chlamydia, genital warts, crabs, gonorrhea, sometimes called the clap, and a whole bunch of other things that are not much fun. Another thing that is not much fun is that a surprising number of people have or have had an STI. As many as 1 in 4 sexually active teenagers have or have had an STI. That's 25%. Think about that the next time you're walking down the hallway. What do STIs have in common? First, all STIs are infections that are most often transmitted through sexual contact. That is, when people get an STI, they usually get it from sex. And that includes penile vaginal sex, oral sex, and anal sex. There are other ways you can get and give STIs, but penile vaginal, oral, and anal sex are the big 3. Second, STIs can cause a variety of symptoms, none of them much fun, including painful urination, bumps, itching, and pus. Yippee! Some people who get an STI won't show any symptoms at all, but they can still pass it on. Third, although there are 20 different STIs, they really come in 3 different flavors. One type of STI is parasitic in nature, which means creepy things crawling around you-know-where. These include pubic lice and scabies. Parasitic STIs can be cured, that is, a doctor can completely get rid of the infection. But they are not fun. A second type of STI is bacterial in nature. They include chlamydia, gonorrhea, and syphilis. They too are not fun, but they can also be cured. The third type of STI is viral in nature. These include HIV, herpes, and HPV. This last one causes genital warts and can cause cancer. Viral STIs cannot be cured, but their symptoms can be treated. If you get a viral STI like herpes or HIV, you will have it for the rest of your life. And the rest of your life is a long time. Definitely not fun. Thus, it is important that you learn how to prevent an STI. That's it for this segment of Quick Zips, the late night edition. Remember, sexually transmitted infections, or STIs, are infections you get through any kind of sexual contact. Some are curable, others are not. None are good. Protect yourself. Be safe. See you next time.
This episode of Quick Zips is brought to you by STI Street and the letters S, T, and I. The STI monsters wish to remind you that not having any sexual contact with other people is the most effective way to avoid getting an STI. And if you do have sex, use a condom.
Alright, that is it for this chapter. Don't forget to submit your lecture activities and complete all the assignments associated with this chapter, and we will see you for the next one. Have a great day.